our domain my x or y values? Good. So here are my x values. All right, and x values are on the x-axis, right? So we're only concerned with the numbers on this line right now. So I'm looking left and right. If I start looking to the left of this graph, does this line look like it's ever going to stop going to the left? No. So I'm going off this direction. Those are negative numbers this way, so we're going off to negative infinity, right? Okay? What about going to the right? Is it ever going to stop going right? Where does it stop at? 4. So basically, this thing goes from negative infinity all the way up till 4. So I could write it that way, from negative infinity to 4. Now, remember we talked about last week when we were doing those inequalities, whether something was included or not. And we knew because if our circle was open, we put the equal to sign. If it was open, we didn't put the equal sign. If it was closed, we did put the equal sign, right? My circle is closed, so it's included. When I write it like this to show it's included, I put a bracket instead of a parenthesis to show it's included. Okay. But I could also write this using an inequality, so one of those less than or greater than signs. So we said these are our x values, so I'm talking about x. And we said x stops at 4, but it keeps going this way forever. So if I'm going this way, am I getting bigger or smaller than 4? Smaller, which would be less than. Good. So less than or equal to, because it's filled in, 4. And that's it. Yes. On the notes, I want you writing both, because we need to make sure we can identify both. But when it comes time for the assignment, I'm okay if you choose one. All right. And if domain is my x value, I know that range is going to be my y values. All right. So range, y, that means up and down. I'm now looking at the numbers on this axis. Okay. So what is the lowest number that we touch on this line? 0. So we're at 0. And my graph is drawn to go like this, right? Is it ever going to stop going up? So we would say it's going off to infinity. Somebody told me that was double 0 earlier, so I just can't draw the infinity like the sideways 8, so that's why I draw it like this. If I do it, it turns like, see, it's like, I don't know. I can't do it, so that is an infinity symbol, not double 0. Okay, so if I want to say that I'm going from 0 to infinity, 0 is included, right, because that point was solid, off to infinity. Or if I want to use an inequality, I'm going to say y. So if the lowest is 0, it can only get bigger. So what symbol would that be? Good. So y is greater than or equal to 0. So there's 2 ways we can write it. Yes? On this one? Because infinity is not a number we actually can count to, right? It goes on forever, so you can't technically include it. It goes on forever. It never stops. No. So the bracket comes from, just like you know when to use an equal sign, right? We use an equal sign when our point is filled in. So you use a bracket when the point is filled in. Okay? A parenthesis if it's not filled in. So like down here, when it's open, we're going to just use a parenthesis instead of a bracket? Good question. Oh, yeah, well, an arrow means it's going to keep going, right? So that is where our infinities come in. So it will be a parenthesis because it can't be included. Okay, number 2. So on number 2, I've got this funny looking parabola because one side kind of drops lower. But is this thing ever going to stop going to the left? Is it ever going to stop going to the right? No. So it's going off to negative infinity and off to positive infinity. So I could write that it goes from negative infinity to positive infinity. But if we were going to write it with an inequality, it never stops, right? So if you remember, back when we talked about the different types of number systems, we said when we include everything, that's called all real numbers. And our symbol is that capital R, sometimes with a double line. So if it never stops, either way, we just use all real numbers. Okay? And then my range is my up and down. So now I'm looking at numbers on this axis. Is this thing ever going to stop going up? Does it stop going down?
Yes.
Where? -4, right? And the line is solid right there, right? It's not an open circle. So it is going to be included. All right, so the lowest this thing gets is -4. And if it's included, instead of a parenthesis, I use a bracket. But this thing is going to go all the way off to infinity. So I just use a parenthesis. Or we could use some kind of inequality. So this one doesn't go forever, so we are going to actually put a y here. Okay, so we said this is the lowest it goes, right? So as I continue, are my y values going to get bigger or smaller? Bigger, so that would be what symbol? Good. So we're greater than or equal to that -4. Okay, number 3. So first we're dealing with domain, that's left and right. How far left do I go before I stop? -2, I'm right here. And how far right do I go? 5. So this time we stop on both ends. So the lowest this thing gets is -2. So x will be greater than -2, but it's got to be less than or smaller than 5. All right. So this looks like the inequalities we were writing towards the end of last week. And we don't put the equal to sign because our circles are open. Or if I was writing it like this, I would just say that it goes from -2 to 5. So it almost looks kind of like a coordinate right there. All right. Now we're going to look at the range. So now we're only worried about numbers on this axis. So how low does this thing go? 0. All right, the lowest it gets is 0. And how high does it go? 2. Now, it is open down here, but it's solid all right here, right? So we are going to be able to include the 2 or put an equal to sign with the 2. So we're going to write it similar to this, right? The smallest it gets is 0. So 0 is less than y, but y is less than or equal to +2. So if I'm going to write it like this, I'm going to have 0 to 2, and I'm going to use a bracket for the 2. just make sure when you're dealing with your domain, you're only looking at numbers here on the x-axis. When you're dealing with your range, you're only looking at numbers on the y. Okay, I want you guys to try the next row, numbers 4, 5, and 6. So just these three, and then we're going to check those three together. So here on number 4, for my domain, does this thing ever stop going left? Does it ever stop going right? So how could I write that? Okay, so from negative infinity off to positive infinity. Alright? But just like on number 2 up here, we can also write it as all real numbers, right? So you could write it either way. Alright? My range, that's the up and down. Will this thing ever stop going down? No. Down would be negative infinity. And how high does this thing go? To 3. Is 3 open or closed? Closed. So I'll put 3 with a bracket. Okay. So here, I want to write this with an inequality. If 3 is the biggest, and then it's going down to negative infinity, is y getting bigger or smaller as it goes? Smaller, so y is less than or equal to 3. Okay. All right, number 5. How far left does this one go? Okay. And is it open or closed? Closed, so I would put a bracket. Okay. And how far right does it go? 4. And it's also closed, so I would need a bracket there as well. I can also write this using inequality signs. It's going to look kind of like what we were doing on number 3, right? So the smallest it is negative 4, is less than or equal to x, which is less than or equal to positive. So if you have to write it like this, you'll have your smallest number on this side, your biggest number on this side, and your letter. Okay? Now my range. How high does this one go? 5. Okay, and how low does it go? 0. So if you drew a line across here, you see that it came all the way up to 5, right? That's how tall it is. So it doesn't matter about where y-axis it is, just overall, how high. So that would be your y-intercept. Okay. Alright, so all the way up to 5, all the way down to 0. So the smallest is 0, so it goes first. And then my biggest is 5, so it goes last. And I would need brackets for both of them because they're both filled in. Okay? And then how would I write that using inequalities? Good. And then we also would say it's less than or equal to 5, right? Because it doesn't keep going on either end. So we do need 2 numbers. So if there's no arrow, we should have something on both ends. Okay. All right. And number 6. So how far to the left do I go on number 6? Negative 4. And how far right? Do I ever stop? All right, I go off to infinity. So at negative 4, is my circle open or closed? Open. So I'm going to use a parenthesis. And like Michaela just said, this goes off to positive infinity. So this one does have an arrow, so we only need one number for our one with an inequality. Okay, So I'm at -4. As I go this way, do I get bigger or smaller than -4? Bigger. So I would say x is greater than -4. And no equal to sign since it's open. Okay? Then we've got our range. That's on the y-axis. How high does this thing go? 3. Okay? And will it ever stop going down? No. So it goes down to -infinity, up to +3. We put the -infinity first because it's the smallest. So we'll say -infinity up to 3. With an inequality, from 3, are my y values getting bigger or smaller? Smaller, so I'd say y is less than 3. Alright? So now you guys do the last row and then we'll check those. So, on number 7, if I'm talking about how far left I'm going, will I ever stop? No, we got this arrow going this way. So this direction is into the negatives, so this way would be good. Okay, and then when I talk about going to the right, I stop. I stop where? Good. Okay, and if I want to write that with an inequality, after 0, are my x's getting bigger or smaller? Smaller. So I would say less than 0. And it is open because our circle's open, right? So we don't put an equal to sign. All right, then my range. How high does this thing go? 4. How low does it go?
-infinity.
Good. So it goes to -infinity up to +4. Good. And then my y. So after 4, is it getting bigger or smaller? After here, am I going up or down? Down. So y is less than 4. Okay. All right. Number 8. How far to the left did I go on number 8? -4. How far right do I go? Infinity, right, because that arrow is taken off. Guys, put your phones up, please. So the lowest I went was -4. And is that circle filled in or open? So I'm going to put a bracket. And like you guys said, it's going to go off to +infinity. All right, and if I want to write that with an inequality, did my x's get bigger or smaller after -4? Bigger. So I would put greater than or equal to -4. All right, and then my range is up and down. How low did this thing get? -2. And it's filled in, right? So I'm going to put a bracket. And how high did it go? Good. So would that mean my y values are getting bigger or smaller? Bigger. So y is greater than or equal to -2. All right, last one. How far left did we go? Good. And how far right? 2. So this time we actually are between 2 numbers. Do I have to use a bracket for either one? No, because they're open. Good. All right, so remember, if we have 2 numbers, we put number, our inequality, the letter, inequality, number. So I should have -2 is less than x, which is less than 2. No equal to signs. All right, and then my range. How low did this one go? -3, and it's solid right there, so it is filled in, so I'm going to need to use a bracket. And how high did it go? 2. But at 2 we are open, so I'm just going to use a parenthesis. All right, so how would I write that with inequalities? to put the equal to sign because it was solid there. Good. So, besides just being able to identify the domain and range based on a picture, there are also a couple other things you could be asked about a problem. So if you flip it over on the back, I've got a few multiple choice questions there for us to go over. No, I'm not. Okay, so on number 1, it says, what is the domain of the function? So we're looking for domain, which is my what values? Okay. When the range, which is my y, are these 3 things. So we have a couple of options on how we could solve this. If we didn't have these graphic calculators, one option would be we could just plug these in for y and see what we get for x, right? F of x means y, they're the same thing. So I could just take one number at a time, plug it in, and see what I get. So I would replace y with 3 and set it equal to 2x plus 3. Now I just got to solve for x. So how would I do that? Okay, and what is 3 minus 3? So I've got 0 equals 2x. And I get, right. And the only one that has that is a. Now, if there were multiple with 0, we would just try the next number and so on, right? But you also, what? Well, I was going to say is you can also go into your graphing calculator, and in y equals, they gave us this function, 2x plus 3. You can just type it in. You hit graph. And then you could pull up the table. You just press second graph. And it pulls up the table. They gave us the y values, right? The first y value that they gave us was 3. So I would just look, okay, when y is 3, x is 0. And I could just follow that down the list, right? So either one would work. All right. Okay, number 2. They say, what is the domain? Domain is what value? For this graph. So what is the furthest to the left value for x on this graph? -5. So I can already eliminate j because it has -6. Okay? Alright. My circles are, or my points are filled in. So they would be included. So we can eliminate g. So now I'm looking at, is it constant all the way from -5 to 4, or is it just at those points? Well, on the front, all of our points were connected by a line, right? Are these connected by a line? So we must just be looking at each value. So it's got to be h. If we wanted to say it was continuous, f would be our answer if it was connected like that. All right. Okay. Number 3 says if the graph of the linear function y equals 2x is shown below. We've got our picture here, and they say what is the domain? Domain is my of the function when the range y is less than or equal to -4. So what I need to do is go in and identify y at -4. -4 would be right here. Okay, so I'm going to draw a line right there because it says we're only worried about less than -4. Would less than -4 be above or below that line? Below. So we don't care about anything above.
A.
Why A? Well, okay, but they didn't ask about just the number. They said for this specific line. So let's look at that. So when I'm at -4, here's my line, right? That's where it touches where we cut it off. where is that coordinate point? Where is this coordinate point that I just drew that dot for? -2, -4. The -2 is my x, and the -4 is my y, right? And we're looking for domain, which is x, so we're definitely going to have a -2 in our answer. So we can eliminate A and C. So we've got x and a -2. Well, we said we don't care about anything going on up there, right? So from here on, as my line is slanting this way, are my x values getting bigger or smaller than -2? Smaller. So what answer choice is that? Good. Alright, last one says, what is the range of the function f of x equals x minus 4 when the domain is -2, 0, and 2? So what should I do on this one?
Plug in the calculator software.
We're going to substitute, but this time they gave us domain, and domain is x. So this time you would be substituting for x, solving for y. So I would really have y equals, if I substitute -2 in there, I've got -2 minus 4. What is -2 minus 4? -6. Alright, and if you did your next one, you'd have 0 minus 4. Well, 0 minus 4 is just -4. You plug in the next one, you've got 2 minus 4. What is 2 minus 4? -2. Good. So what's my answer?
J.
Alright, so make sure on those questions you read carefully what they give you. This time they gave us x, so we plugged in or substituted for x. Up here they gave us range, which is y, so we substituted for y. Yes. Yes, f of x